this all came from me messing up running early on. So I would run, and I'd call it my easy runs, and I'd take a picture of my watch, and I'd post it on social media. And my easy runs at the time, or I thought were easy, were like 6:45, 7-minute pace. But I'd finish this run, didn't feel easy. I'd be on my knees, like gasping for breath, I'd be dying, and I wasn't getting any faster. Like my splits weren't getting any faster. It didn't feel more comfortable. And finally, this woman who's a triathlon coach in Austin, Natasha, who was my coach for my last Ironman, she called me out and she said, "You're running too fast. You're running too hard." I was like, "Who the heck are you?" So I met up with her and I talked to her for a while, and she's like, "I want to help you with your training. I want to help you get faster." She's like, "In order to get faster, you actually have to run slower." And for me at the time, it made no sense, right? It's like, if you're telling me I want to go from point A to point B and I want to get there quickly or more quicker, why would training below that threshold make any sense? And at the time, I didn't understand aerobic base building training or zone training, zone 2 training. So we started implementing this method called the Maffetone Method, which is the MAF 180 formula. MAF. MAF 180 formula.
Okay.
So essentially what you do is, this formula is used to identify your max aerobic heart rate. Not your max heart rate, your max aerobic heart rate, which is the max that your heart rate should reach in order to maintain that aerobic base building zone.
Does that mean that if you go above that, you're in the anaerobic threshold?
Technically,
so like,
yes.
That's when you're burning, you're not using oxygen as a fuel, right?
Correct. You're not using oxygen efficiently.
Okay.
So you take 180 minus your age. So I am 31. 180 minus 31 is 149.
Okay.
And anyone can apply this. So 149 beats per minute is the max that my heart rate should go on these easy runs. And never use your watch to like identify or track your heart rate. It's extremely inaccurate.
Really?
Extremely inaccurate.
How do they do that? Do they just like take a sensor on the back? Is it like, are they reading something? Is it pressure?
There's a sensor on the back, but like I found that the first 2 to 3 miles might be accurate, and it'll jump up. Like it could be 135 beats per minute for the first 2 miles. Same effort, all of a sudden it goes to 175, 180.
So how do you do it then?
Chest strap.
Okay.
So always use chest strap. It's a chest strap that goes across your chest. The sensor's right here. It syncs via Bluetooth to your watch, and that is the most accurate reading for heart rate. So like what I would be doing when I was training for my last marathon on my easy runs, which my easy runs were below my max aerobic heart rate, is that I have my chest strap monitored on. I'd be running, and every so often I would just check.
Okay.
The only thing I had on my screen, I wasn't watching mileage, I wasn't watching pace, nothing. All I was watching was heart rate.
Okay.
So if my max aerobic heart rate was 149, I'd give myself like a 10 beats per minute standard off that. So like anywhere from 135, 139 to 149 beats per minute was that sweet spot for me. So I'd run, and every 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I'd just take a glance.
Okay.
If I was too high, I'd pull back. If I was going too slow, I'd push up a little bit.
Okay.
But I'd maintain that zone for all my easy runs. Because like we were talking about, the issue is that people often run their easy days too hard, and they run their hard days too easy. So a few issues with this. One, if you're running your easy days too hard, you're not building your aerobic base. So if you think of like your aerobic base is like the foundation of your house. You can't build a house with no foundation. If you put a house on top of just dirt with no foundation, it's going to fall over.
Yeah.
Same thing applies to endurance training. Build your base, build your foundation, which is your aerobic training. That should be like 80 to 85% of your training. And the other 10 to 15% of your training is your speed work, your anaerobic threshold, lactate threshold, track workout, stuff like that. That's like your 10 to 15% of training.
Okay.
10 to 20% of training.
Yeah.
So, one, by doing these easy, slow runs, you're building that aerobic foundation, but you're also maximizing recovery. So when you go into these workouts, you're getting everything out of those workouts.
Okay.
That's when you refine.
Okay.
So when you do this appropriately and you do it right over a period of time, it's 80-20 split, 80% like purely aerobic, 20% speed. You're building.
Would you say like your recovery, would you notice there's a difference like your sleep and nutrition? Like if you didn't sleep well, would your heart rate be higher and you just adjust your rate to be lower?
Say it again?
Like, were you paying attention to things like your recovery? Like if you didn't recover well, would your heart rate be higher on the same effort run, so to speak?
Oh yeah.
And so how would you address that?
So a few things I'll track. I track resting heart rate. If I see a spike in my resting heart rate over a period of a couple days, I know that I'm either overtraining or under recovered. Clear example is last marathon, going into it last January, my resting heart rate before that race was 40 beats per minute. After the marathon, it was at 55 beats per minute, and it took months to bring it back down. It's now back to 40 beats per minute, but I know after this next marathon, my resting heart rate will increase again. So key takeaways from that, if you are training in a block and all of a sudden your resting heart rate starts increasing, that might be a sign that you're under recovering or you're overtraining. And there's the argument, is there even a thing as overtraining or is it just under recovering?
Yeah.
So resting heart rate is one thing to watch out for. Another thing is effort or heart rate for certain workouts. So say for example, week 1 of a marathon prep, I do a workout and my perceived effort was a 7. My average heart rate for that workout was 165.
Okay.
8 weeks later, you would think you'd be improving. However, if the effort is higher for that workout and my heart rate is higher for that workout, I might not be recovered going into that workout. So tracking historical data and then real-time data to see how you're recovering during that block.
And then last question, is there a so if you use the math for the ceiling, do you have a bottom that you consider counting in that? Because obviously, like if you're not recovered, a walk could get your heart rate up, but like where do you consider the bottom of that zone?
I think it's really like individually specific.
Okay.
Like obviously you don't want to be like so low where you're like really not getting that aerobic like stimulus.
Yeah.
Like you want that aerobic stimulus. So I always go like 10, maybe 20 beats per minute backed off of that ceiling of your max aerobic heart rate. But like that's a sweet spot for me.
Okay. So then you could probably say 10 to 20 being the middle, then you made 10 to 20 below. So let's say you're 140, 149, so 150 roughly. And you're somewhere between 130, 135. Then somewhere in that 120 area would be where you kind of consider that would be the basement, so to speak.
Yeah,
roughly, you probably feel it out. Like, but I'm just saying, like for people who don't have as much of an intuitive awareness as you, like, is there like a rule of thumb?
Yeah,
like,
yeah. It's a good example. If you're not tracking heart rate and you don't have a chest strap monitor, because obviously like running is great because there's literally zero barrier to entry, right? You don't need a gym, you don't need equipment, you can just go run anywhere. And that's why during quarantine and lockdown, more people started running. So if you can't afford, you don't have a good pair of running shoes, you don't have the chest strap monitor, you don't have a watch, a good like description of what zone 2 running feels like and looks like is based off of effort. It's conversational. Like I can have a run with you and we can be having a conversation. I can be talking in paragraphs to you and still breathing effectively. Right. So and you have to be really honest with yourself, because it's really easy to say, I'm in zone 2, I'm running easy, when in reality you're not. So the only one that's getting hurt in that situation is the runner itself. So there's never a problem with running slower because you're building that aerobic foundation. Yeah. But if you're running too fast, you're in that gray zone where you're not getting anything.
Some of my understanding too is it's supposed to be fairly healthy for you. Like sometimes longer distance running and or trying to run long distances fast can be unhealthy. We've heard of people dying at young ages and stuff, and they're still trying to find the exact direct correlations. But as you were mentioning, the elevated heart rate several days after could be an area of concern. But this zone 2 that you're referring to is supposed to be able to stretch the ventricles of the heart in a very gentle and very passive way, so that over time you can handle more and more workload. You'll be maybe running a little further, a little faster, but at a suppressed heart rate. Yeah. And so when you redline everything, just like in the weight room, the interesting thing is all the stuff that we do in the gym came from track. Most of it came from track, then it went to Olympic lifting, and then it trickled down into powerlifting. So a lot of this stuff, like when I started running, I understood a lot of this already had a base of it or a decent idea of it. But then to put it into practice can be difficult because that 80% or that kind of zone 2 stuff is, it feels too slow, like you get frustrated because you're like, this doesn't feel good enough. Like you want it to like feel hard. And when you hear when you hear people spit out like a time domain, they say, oh, I'm doing a 8:30 pace. You think 8:30, that doesn't sound like it's setting the world on fire.
You're judging it.
But go ahead and try to do that for several miles. Can be very, very challenging, especially if you're new. So somebody that's newer might be in a 10-minute range. They might be in an 11-minute range. Whatever, it doesn't really matter, but find a pace that is comfortable for you that you can repeat.
I mean, the quote, comparison is a thief of joy, is so accurate in terms of running because it's really easy as a new runner to start running and you see someone post a picture of their watch on Instagram that says they just finished a 10-mile run at a 8-minute pace, and you're like, holy crap, like, am I supposed to be running at that pace?
Yeah.
So then when you go for your easy run, you're like, I need to pick it up a little bit.
They should have picked it up a little more. Should try a little harder. Yeah.
So I think that's like the one thing with running is you have to realize that where you're starting is where you're starting. And you can't compare that to anyone else. And that might even be like a run walk in the beginning. So when we talk about volume in terms of running, a lot of times we look at distance, but you can just as easily look at it in terms of time. So like when I worked with Zach Bitter for my last ultra prep, none of his program was based off of distance. Everything he wrote down for me was based off time and effort. So say you just start running and maybe you'll jog for 10 minutes and then walk for 5 minutes. And then jog for 10 minutes and walk for 5 minutes. And then you slowly increase that to, okay, maybe now I'm jogging for 10 minutes and walking for 2 minutes. Jogging for 10 minutes and walking for 2 minutes. And then you get to a point where you're jogging for 20 minutes straight and then 30 minutes straight. And you're not even looking at distance or pace, you're just running for time. Yeah. That's one of the best ways to get started.
Volume in there too.
Right.
That's interesting when looking at it. Like the amount of steps you're getting. It's like you can run real quick and do a certain distance, but if you think about I've just got to do this for the amount of time, then you're more likely to slow down the pace, get more steps in, and get that volume, work density in, which is interesting.
And then in terms of volume, like we talked about earlier too, being very careful with not increasing volume too fast. So like a good rule of thumb is don't increase volume more than 10% from the previous week. This is because of one, mitigates risk of injury, helps you acclimate, and then you can recover effectively based off of what your body can handle. Now where it gets really cool, like as you start running, it's this simple, just like, or what seems like simple, I'm just moving my legs faster than a walk from point A to point B. So like you talk about building this aerobic base, this aerobic foundation, and it's how do you build off of that? So recently we did this really cool thing. It was at this facility in Austin called Run Lab, and we did blood lactate testing.
Oh, wow.
Super cool. So essentially it tested the efficiency of your body in terms of clearing lactate or lactic acid out of the blood. So it really helps you have a strong aerobic foundation because your body is efficient at utilizing oxygen as an energy source. What happens when you increase intensity during endurance training is that your body can't utilize oxygen efficiently anymore. So what happens is lactic acid or blood lactate starts entering the blood and rising. Eventually it gets to a point where, because your body can still clear lactate out of the blood at efficient levels at certain intensities, but when the intensity gets too high, your blood lactate can't be cleared out of the blood efficiently, and that's when you start getting fatigued and tired and you burn out. So what we wanted to find out at Run Lab is we wanted to identify what that ceiling, my lactate threshold was, where at what pace, at what distance can my body run efficiently where it's building blood lactate, but it's also clearing it fast enough that I can sustain that effort. I mean, that gets like kind of the nitty gritty, but when you go to a marathon prep or build, and if you want to hit a certain pace and a certain time, you need to know, can your body actually clear blood lactate efficiently enough to hold that pace? What happened my second marathon ever was I was going for a sub 3. It was an Austin Marathon. And I knew I wasn't in shape for a sub 3 going into it. But right before we got started, I said, fuck it. I was like, my mind is strong enough to hold a 6:45 minute per mile pace. My mind is stronger than my body. So I went out for that marathon with that mindset of, if I just hold this pace, I can, it's less than 3 hours.
It's all mental.
It's all mental. I went out for that first 6 miles and I held like a 6:20 pace. And at mile 6, I realized, I mean, there's literally no physical way I was going to hold that for another 20 miles. The last 20 miles of that race was the biggest struggle bustle ever. And I ran a 3:24 that marathon. But it taught me that there's certain things you can't mentally outperform.
Yeah.
If your body can't physically complete that task or that pace, there's no way around it. So we went back to the drawing board, and what we had to do was run more easy, slow, aerobic base building miles.
Let the ego go.
Yep, let the ego go.
Running is the death of the ego.
I want to point out 2 things that I think are really important, or maybe even more, but I think two things that I heard you say that I think are important. Because people ask all the time about injuries. And I asked Nick about injuries. I've asked him about injuries. The easiest way to not get hurt is to stay in your own lane and to not pay attention to what other people are doing. When I started running, I would intentionally run very, very, very slow, and I would intentionally run very, very little. Remember earlier he mentioned volume, the overall amount of running that you're doing. If you are not running at all and you want to get into running, and then all of a sudden this week, comes at the end of the week and you ran 7 miles and you don't have a previous running history, that is, in my opinion, that's way too much work. I would just say, hey, let me see if I can run a little bit here and there, see how my body is. I'll run every other day for whatever my body can handle, and just really try to judge it. But you will get hurt, probably most likely, regardless of what you do. But take our advice on what we're saying here. You want to really pay attention to that volume. You want to pay attention to that intensity. If you're not recovering from these runs, you're going to go out and you're going to go for a run. Next thing you know, your ankle is going to be jacked up, or your calf. And sometimes these injuries, like I've been very fortunate with myself. I've never had an injury that has really taken me out for any real length of time. So I've been very lucky through all the different things that I've been doing. And I would hate to see that to happen to somebody. Somebody goes out for a run and they tear something, an Achilles tendon, you're out for a year. So really be thoughtful on how you're going to do this, because it's not about how you're running right now. It's about how you're going to be running in 3 years or 5 years from now.
I mean, endurance in itself is the biggest test of patience, right? Because there's no way to get faster than to just embrace the time and embrace the journey. And I've talked about it before, but the day I got out of the Army in 2017, I made a YouTube video and I said, I will never run a day in my life again. And then it was like 6 months later that I ran my first marathon. I ran that, and I think it was like 3 hours, 57 minutes. And then next year, I did the Austin Marathon again. I ran it 4 hours, 15 minutes. So I got slower. I got 18 minutes slower. And then I wanted to test myself with an Ironman and then some ultras. But it's been now nearly 5 years of endurance training, and it just takes time. You just chip away slowly and slowly and slowly, where when I first got started, if I would have ran 6 days a week, 11 miles a day, I mean, there's no way I would have been able to recover. I'd be burnt out and I'd be injured. So it's just going into it, realizing that you have to slowly build this volume up over time, whether that be distance or time on your feet.
All right, what do we got now?
Time on our feet.
It's a little time on our feet. It's a little run.
Follow you.
You can take the competitor out of the gym, but you can't take the gym out of the competitor.
That's right.
Well, that's one reason I love running in the mornings when it's dark out, like no one's up yet, is I have found that when I feel like I'm alone by myself, I can be more honest with my pace and my time. And then I'm out running when it's daytime out, neighbors are out, I'm like passing people.
Oh, you see other runners too.
You do, yeah.
I'm gonna catch that person.
Like, if you ever run a trail, the guy in front of you, you're like, all right, I'm just gonna pass this guy, and I'm gonna pass that person and her. Before you know it, you're like way out of your pace.
Yeah.
Your heart rate is jacked up. It's ego running. But it's when in the morning for me, when it's dark and I see no one, I can just stay in my lane. That's why I love it.
Yeah, I feel like
I got into a battle one day with an old lady. She was like way out in front of me, and I'm like, I'm gonna catch her. And I thought just because she was running slow, that'd be like. But for me, it was long. It was like 4 miles, and I just don't have a lot of experience. So I'm like running. And I finally did pass her, but I just wanted to like there's like a pond right there. I'm like, I just want to just knock her right in the pond.
Build up aggression. Or the
I
last,
tell my wife, she's like, that make you feel good? Like beat up on an old lady? I was like, made me feel amazing.
You don't understand. She was taunting me the whole time. She got what she deserved.
In my head, I was like, I'm gonna catch her, and it took me forever, but I was way out of my own.
Yeah.
You know, she got the last laugh, I guess is my point.
Well, people ask the question all the time in terms of running about. And I used to do the same thing in terms of like the runner's high.
Right.
So remember when I first started running, I was like, this is bullshit. There's no such thing as runner's high, and it took me like months to actually experience what was this runner's high, which for me now is the solitude. Like I run more now for the mental aspects of it than the physical aspects.
In the middle of a run, you start crying. Think about how thankful you are for your family or for your wife or something, right? Like all this weird shit happens. And you're like going past people, and you're like, oh my god. Hopefully nobody sees it.
I get emotional during my morning run sometimes.
Absolutely, happens to me all the time too.
Yeah, and because like I've talked about, we have so many distractions in the world right now. We got our phone, we got TV, we got media, we got people everywhere. My morning run is where I have no phone. It's quiet. I don't see anyone, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the book Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Yeah.
Amazing book. But when I was reading Deep Work, it made me think of my morning run, because there's this isolation, there's no distractions. I can reach these depths of things that I'm experiencing in my life or problems that I'm trying to navigate and dissect. And during my morning run, that's when it happens. And I reach these depths that I can't reach anywhere else, because as soon as I get home, I know phone's going off, emails are unanswered, there's fires to fight at work.
Yeah.
But I have that 1 to 2 hours in the morning where it's mine.
From a mental perspective, what's like a small cue you give yourself just to, because I'd imagine like we were talking about the zone 2, like I don't think that you can just hang out in zone 2 and do the same thing all the time. You did mention 20% of the time you're out of that, but even within the zone 2, do you just push like you're at like, let's say a 6 out of 10, you turn the dial up a little bit, 6.5 intensity or 7 even within that zone 2, or you don't really bother?
I will, but I start every run the same way, where I start that first mile or two very slow, and within that first mile or two you're gonna know how you're feeling.
Oh, I see.
That first like 10 steps might feel like dog crap, but then mile 2 you might think, I feel pretty good. So I can slowly, my effort is low, let me ramp up the pace a little bit and see what happens. And that's what I'll do. After that first 1 or 2 miles, I'll slowly ramp it up. If the effort jacks up, then I'll pull it back down. But I'll kind of just play with it. I'll feel it, because no 2 runs are ever the same. Like every run is unique and feels different. Sometimes I'll go out for a run and I feel great, and within a mile I feel like crap. And sometimes I go out for a run and it takes me 5 miles to warm up. But I'll kind of feel it out. The first mile or 2 always is just slowly, gradually increase into it. That also allows your heart rate to just acclimate to the effort you're putting out.
Can you give us some pointers on running, just form and technique, especially for somebody first starting out?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's really easy to overcomplicate the form. It's one of the things we were talking about earlier, where if you go into a run thinking of all these cues, your run is going to be like, you're thinking about your feet, you're thinking about your arms. One, I would say just go out there and be relaxed. So a lot of people come out right on the gates and they're tensed up. They're like squeezing something in their fist. They're trying to muscle through. Just stay relaxed, light up top, and relax down at the bottom. Like if you think about going out for a run, like it should be like light like this. It shouldn't be.
And maybe only getting off the ground as much as you would for like a jump rope. Like,
yeah.
You know, people try to jump rope when they first do it. They try to jump really high, but you only need to jump however big the rope is, right?
You can almost just like shuffle.
Yes.
So like if you go from a walk to what is in a shuffle, where it's just slowly picking up your feet. But people also refer to like the strike, and I think that's, you know, we worked with our team worked with
Here we go.
Run RX, who's a running coach a few months ago, and because if you watch me, everyone says I'm a heel striker. I'm a rear foot striker.
So offensive.
People get so mad at me. One, I think it has a lot to do with natural body mechanics, the way you're built. But don't think of it as a strike anymore, because if you think of a strike is like, that's a strike.
Yeah.
There's a start and there's a stop, and it's very aggressive. But in terms like we were talking about previously, like if you think of a jog, this is a jog right here. The only thing that moves you forward is to lean into it. So it almost should look the same as if you're standing upright. Like this is what I think my jog is right here. And to move forward, just lean.
When I first started, I just kind of thought of this idea of like, and I saw some other people running this way, and I noticed that they were people that were a little heavier, and they were people that were a little older. And I'm like, I got a powerlifting background. I'm not much of a runner, so I'm like, let me actually just employ what they're doing. And Zach Bitter, when he came here, he just said, look, man, just lean forward a bunch until you fall, and then you kind of catch yourself, and then maybe you just go from there. And so like me, I was like, I think low and slow. Like down here, boom. Like I don't really care what internet people say. Like to me, that was jogging. So that was how I started. Now it feels good because I can actually get myself into a little bit of a run, but I still don't have the capacity to really truly run for like 4 or 5 miles at a clip. Mm-hmm. I'm working my way into that.
I think one that, just to like be clear, we're talking about a lot is people get really caught up in the theory of this stuff. So like if you're going to sprint or you're wearing, so it depends on like the situation you're in. If you're
Sprinting
running,
is a whole nother
if you're top end sprint or really just doing anything a mile or like you're really 5K or less, like in that kind of area, like you're going to want to be on your forefoot and run as quick as you can because you're accelerating, maintaining a top percentage in the anaerobic threshold. As the context changes, like if you're doing ultra marathons, it's like the shoes you wear do allow you to run differently. The history you have of running does affect what you're going to be able to do. So, you know, when you do this, like whether or not we're looking at the ideal or what people would have done with no shoes, like that's one piece, but we're not people with no shoes, and many people are just starting off. And so I think getting caught up in the internet battles of like always this or always that, I think this is the point. And we talked about earlier is like when you look at the sport like the competition part of an ultra marathon, potentially an Ironman or like 100-mile races, that's not like running. That's like I'm surviving. And so like I'm gonna have special shoes. Like we don't have cleats. Like people, you want to get on and this is I spend a lot of time talking about this stuff with the shoes, but it's like humans don't have cleats under the bottom of their feet, so cleats give you an advantage. And so when you're going a specific type of race in a specific environment, of course do what advantage you have. So I think the important thing is what if I hear both of you saying is that start with what is doable for where you're at and build towards what feels comfortable and sustainable. And if that serves you, continue do that. Things you want to pay attention to, if I may, just like feedback. So if your knees are hurting, your shins are hurting, your feet are hurting, your body's hurting, potentially step back and look at that. But I think some of the stuff you were talking earlier is if you take the ego out, if you follow a program, if you don't know what you're doing, find a coach who can walk you through, do this and do this. Because really it's not about them pushing you as much as for some people it's pushing them. For a lot of people, it's holding you back a little bit. Let's stay back a little bit. So find a coach who can get you that program, and then understand that there is some strength involved too. You can't just, you don't have to have a bunch of weights, but you do need to do some stuff for your feet and ankles, and that matters. And then if you do that, you listen to your body, trust where you're at, what shoes you have access to, how your feet feel, how your body feels, and then lean in and build up. If you don't start because you think it needs to be perfect, that's always going to be the worst option. So just to find some context and all that, because I think there's a nuanced answer.
Shoe wise, you might be confused. We all got some different shoes on, and people ask tons of questions. Again, for me, I just thought I don't have a lot of experience running. The first two things I hear people talk about are their lower back and their knees, and we can argue that maybe this allows you to heel strike more, and so maybe it leads to more knee and whatever. But as soon as I heard that there's shoes that like they have banned from certain running events, I'm like, those are perfect for me. I want to try to cheat this thing as much as I can. So these shoes are kind of known a little bit as like a rocker shoe. They kind of rock you forward. It has a carbon foot plate in it, and it gives you a little slight advantage. So for me personally, that's how I made the assessment of like picking these up. I didn't think it would be a good idea, even though I love the Vivo Barefoots. It didn't make a lot of sense for me to go from like not running at all to running on hard surfaces in a minimalist shoe. I was just like,
That's
I'm
how people get
probably
injured.
going to get hurt. Yeah.
The big three mistakes is they change shoes too fast, they change their running form too fast, and they don't do any strength work for their feet. Like those three things get people hurt more than anything else. But it's also remembering, it's like those aren't going to be the shoes you wear the rest of your life, right? It's okay to, you got, as you first started lifting, Mark had a big pink pad under his shoulders to keep him soft, and then he worked up to you build up. You can develop and you can build into something, right?
My brother threw that in the garbage. Yeah. I like tried to get one or something. I borrowed one from like a friend or took it from the high school gym or something, and my brother he's like, this is bullshit. You're not wearing this pad to squat. He's like, this is unbelievable. What are you doing?
Well, I'd say one of the coolest parts about running is fitness as a whole, but I'm sure at one point you told yourself you weren't a runner.
Yeah.
Right? And we had a cool story. We hosted a marathon a few weeks back. It was a Go One More marathon, and I met this girl and her husband the day before the marathon. And all her husband wanted to do was run the half marathon at BPN for his birthday. And his wife, who wasn't a runner, said, okay, well, if this is what you want for your birthday, I'm going to train with you, and I'm going to run my first half marathon as well.
That's awesome.
So I stood at the end of the finish line, and I watched them cross the finish line, and I hugged everyone that crossed, and she said that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But like, she was teared up, she was crying, she was accomplished. Just like fitness and running is applied, is that nothing is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right? Matthew McConaughey says that. Like,
Yeah.
He doesn't believe in the word unbelievable. Where if you don't believe you're a runner, I guarantee you can do a 5K, I guarantee you can do a half marathon, I guarantee you can do a full marathon, I guarantee you can do an ultra. But it's one baby step at a time. Just get your foot wet, just get out there, just go for a 10-minute run, that's getting started. Who knows, 5 years later you might be doing 100-mile races through the Rocky Mountains. But you'll never know if you didn't take one foot out there.
What podcast was it on where Matthew McConaughey said that?
I interviewed him.
I know.
Oh.
I'm trying to give you props.
Oh, yes. Bear Performance Podcast.
Yeah, there we go.
Episode with Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, no, I saw it. That was amazing.
Nothing is unbelievable. And we said that really, it stuck with me. Where it's,
I was just thinking,
like underhand.
it's a
pitch.
Talladega
I'm
Nights.
It's like pitching. It's like pitching to like a little kid. Like I'm like, here's the ball. I try to throw it. And he
I
just
was really excited to respond. Like,
completely.
that's my podcast.
Yeah,
I
completely.
think
missed.
Talladega Nights is like, who are you sponsored by? Me. What conversation was that? My conversation. I said that.
That stuck with me. Where it's nothing. He doesn't believe in the word unbelievable. And running is one of those things that can be applied for a lot. Fitness as a whole. Like people think that they have to be put in a box in terms of fitness. Like you are a powerlifter, you are a CrossFit athlete, you are a marathon runner. So when they see someone coming from a strength background into running, it is, whoa, go back in your box. Mm-hmm. But it's no, I want to be challenged. I want to learn from this process, and look what I'm going to do, because nothing is unbelievable.
I like that a lot. What is something you're concentrating on when you're like running? Like if you're trying to do like a 6-minute mile, is there any sort of form or technique stuff you're thinking about, or are you been running enough to where you don't have to think about it much?
A lot of it's like staying. So right now my tempo workouts are like this past week, for example. My past week's workout was 2-mile warm up, 8 miles at a 6:15 minute per mile pace, and then 4 800-meter repeats at in like 2:55 each. So during that 8-mile tempo run at 6:15 minutes per mile, I'm just thinking stay calm. Because as soon as you get too excited, as soon as you try to go a little bit too fast, your heart rate jacks up. Once your heart rate jacks up in endurance training, it's really hard to bring that back down. It takes time. So the whole thing I'm thinking of the entire time is I know I can hit the split, go into it with confidence, but also just staying calm and collective and breathing. Just, like I'll try to breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth. If you start mouth in, out, you start hyperventilating. But just controlling heart rate in terms of endurance training is like the number one thing. As soon as you push out a little bit more effort and that heart rate goes up, you have to be ready to bring that down, because a lot of things affect it. Terrain, if there's a small hill, heart rate's going to elevate. Weather, if it gets hot, it's going to elevate. So it's like taking all these factors into consideration to control your heart rate, because just because I can do a 6:15 minute per mile pace on a flat road in Texas doesn't mean I can do the same thing in the mountains in Colorado at 10,000 feet of elevation. So there's a lot of factors to consider.
Have you found if you tried harder, sometimes you do worse?
100%. Yeah. That's why I really like to gradually increase into a workout. And that's why we do these, like people always ask, why are you doing 2-mile warm up before you do these like tempo workouts?
Blowing out all your energy.
Yeah. And it's like, well, that's a really easy, slow, gradual into, because one, I don't want to get injured. I want to allow my heart rate to have some sort of stimulus where it's already kind of primed going into a workout. And for me, that takes about 2 miles. And then I'm ready.
Awesome, man. I think we're good. I think we got a lot of, anything else you want to add or share?
I would say, like, for endurance training or running, don't be afraid to jump into it if it's unknown or uncomfortable. And like we talked about, you don't have to go run 8 to 10 miles to get into running. It can be 10 minutes, 20 minutes, build up to 30 minutes. It can be a run, walk, slowly build into. And what you'll notice is that a year from now, you'll look back and you'll laugh at what your long run was a year from now. And then 2 years from now, you look back and you'll laugh at what the previous long run was. So I remember for me, when I had an 8-mile run on the schedule 3 years ago, I mean, that was intimidating. An 8-mile run, I was like, holy crap, like, I'm going to eat so much food after this 8-mile run. And now my daily mileage, like my easy runs, are 10 to 11 miles. And that's just to showcase that it takes time to build endurance. And you have to be patient and work through it. But it's just getting started, just that first step.
He's got no toenail on his big toe.
He's
Got pus shooting out of it, which was absolutely disgusting. But kind of awesome at the same time. And you have how many miles to run later today?
I'm doing 11 miles today. This is my easy run.
I'm gonna join him on the track and just enjoy how many times he laps me. Should be a lot of fun. Anyway, strength is never weakness, weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later.